We are honored to have some of the top luminaries of the cloud world with us here today. I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, Aaron Levy, CEO of Box. Les Ottolenghi, CIO of Caesars Entertainment. Rajiv Gupta, CEO of Skyhigh Networks. And Charles Race, President of Okta. And joining us to moderate the discussion today is David Needle. David is a journalist for CIO, Computer Week, or Computer World, and eWeek. He's been covering Silicon Valley business for over 20 years. David, thank you. Sure.
All right, great to see everybody today. We have a terrific panel lined up, I think, on a pretty important topic. As was mentioned, I've been covering Silicon Valley for over 20 years, long enough to remember Scott McNealy famously saying, there is no security, get over it. But I think we have gone over it. I think it's too important an issue to ignore, and that's what we're going to delve into right here. And for that, I want to start right with the CIO's perspective on how security of the cloud has changed in the past 5 years and kind of what's driving that. And I think Les would be a great person to kick that off, so if you wouldn't mind, Les.
Sure, and that's a great question. Security in the last 5 years has changed dramatically. You can look at the way that companies approach their business, and the risk of not having proper security is probably greater, unfortunately, than the worth of some of the companies that are actually providing those technologies to their customers. So whether it's a major breach around personal information, or it's a breach of just the contents of a company's enterprise, there are a lot of reasons to have amazing, incredible, and secure, scalable technologies. So when I think about it from a CIO's perspective, I think part of my role in business is to make certain there's not only security, but there's a direction or a strategy for the type of protection that's needed for today and then for tomorrow. And as we emerge out of what are on-premise systems to the very efficient cloud-based computing platforms, there's also a change in the basic business model for a company, and that is a platform company. And it can't survive, and it can't grow without having cloud. And if cloud's not secure, it can't do any of the above.
Rajiv, what?
So what we see is that the CIO more and more is being invited to the executive suite in organizations. And because that's a realization that information data is what is the lifeblood of most organizations, right? It's, as Leslie mentioned, it's allowing them to grow, but in some cases get into entirely new businesses that weren't even possible before. Right. But in the absence of security, or when security is lax, we also see that elevation can be a drop very quickly as well. And the CIO sometimes is also the one who has to take the brunt of a lack of security. Right. So I firmly believe that, as we were mentioning this, the cloud is fundamental to a lot of businesses moving forward. In fact, I think what, Les, you have done, and I hope we get a chance to talk about it, in terms of your use of data, right, or your customer data and how you're using it effectively, loyalty programs. The use of data, use of cloud is fundamental to how we're growing our businesses, but security has to be a strong underpinning for us to continue the journey.
And Aaron, I mean, you're not a security company, but it couldn't be more important to the success of your business, obviously. What are you hearing from CIOs and the customers that you deal with?
Yeah, I think same kind of points that have been previously mentioned. From our perspective, what we do at Box is we help companies manage, share, secure, and organize how they work with their unstructured information. So all the documents and media assets and marketing materials, all the data that you need to be able to work with on a daily basis. And we work with about 65% of the Fortune 500. And one of the biggest trends we see is that as you change the sort of work style of an organization, so the way that we collaborate, the way that we work together, the way that we work globally, the way that we share information globally, this fundamentally changes the security paradigm necessary to actually make sure that you're protecting your information. And so we've gone from a world where 5, 10, 15 years ago, you could essentially, or at least ostensibly, secure your enterprise by locking down all your information, keeping it in your data center. And then your only real vectors of attack were people emailing, attachments and that being insecure in a lot of ways. But today, given the flow of information in and out of the organization, there's simply no way to keep your enterprise secure in an on-premises world. And so we need to rethink the security model at the most fundamental level and imagine a perimeterless, a borderless, a world where security is effectively built into the products and the services that we use, and a completely different way of thinking about data security given the flow of information in the digital age. And that's what we try and focus on at Box, and that's why we partner with companies like Okta and Skyhigh to actually enable that security in the enterprise.
And I just want to double up on that and stay with you for a second.
That'd be great.
Because it also strikes me that with the advent of cloud, we're seeing more kinds of data used in different ways. I mean, is that kind of the Box story?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we go back to when we founded the company 12 years ago, it was mostly documents, and that people wanted to be able to share in a corporate environment. Now it's more videos, it's more photos. There's an explosion of information. It could be CAD files, it could be medical images, it could be healthcare documentation. So where maybe again 5 or 10 or 15 years ago, as a CIO, you had to care about mostly credit card data or things that had personal kind of sensitive information. Now you look at the recent breaches, and there's reputational harm, there's brand harm to companies because you have so much more information that is unstructured in the enterprise that it could be a patent document, it could be a research document, it could be a new marketing campaign that you don't want to leak out, it could be a new movie that we've seen in Hollywood. And so the need for completely changing the way that we secure our data is coming in concert with the fact that we have a growing amount of data that is taking on new forms and being used in completely new ways inside of the enterprise.
Les, your business is more traditional in that sense, but do you also see this need to create, manage and secure all kinds of stuff?
Yeah, actually, I don't think there's any business that's traditional in any new sense.
Good point.
And I think for us, it is customer data, it's loyalty information, and so on. And all the points here are made are absolutely correct. The biggest issue for us is this transition away from where we have to protect a data center. And we have this zero trust or this without a perimeter sort of way of dealing with our customers and all of our business partners, because we can't have that free flow of exchange of data and information. We can't grow as a business. We're uncompetitive. So the cloud allows us to do that in so many ways that are much more efficient. But when you think about the security posture, the security posture is about segmentation. It's about breaking out what is your high ground, what is most important to you in terms of data. And if that data lives in the cloud, you have to have a capability to assess whether you're secure in the cloud, and then from an identity and access management point of view, identify who is trusted within that environment. Without those two components together, it really doesn't work. So essentially, there is a new paradigm, if you will, for enterprise to grow, and that is to have secure cloud and do the right, proper things around identity access management.
I think, again, with the explosion in cloud, we're talking about how it's dealing with this explosion of data and different kinds of data. So did you want to say anything else about that?
Yeah, David, actually, so I think when we talk of data in general, sometimes we talk of data as something static.
Right.
I think that is, today, the more important data is data that's created from data, right? So, The Economist famously, I think, wrote recently that data is taken over from oil as the most valuable asset in the economy. I think that's part of the story. The other part of the story is, unlike oil, which gets consumed, data, when you consume it, you create something richer and more interesting, more important. So the explosion actually continues, right? It doesn't just, you're not just using oil to create greenhouse gases. You're actually using data to create more interesting data. So I think that data explosion is real, right? In the context of cloud, the data explosion now gets magnified, because now the collaboration is not just within your organization, it's with your ecosystem, your partners, your customers. So I think that's one aspect of it. The other aspect, like we were talking about earlier, is in order for us to allow this data explosion to benefit us, us as the organization, we have to make sure that we leverage the cloud, because that's part of the explosion, but we also have to make sure that we have the security tied to it, such that we can benefit from that, right? So to me, data is a massively growing element. The importance is massively growing as well, again, as other people have mentioned. But then there are other aspects of that to make sure that, A, we bring forward the mechanisms to allow it to grow, to collaborate, to bring value, which is the cloud, and then we make sure we have the needs that are covered for us to gain the benefit of that, which is security.
And Charles, great points here. Devices, different interacting with customers and partners. I mean, this security issue is pretty far
It's interesting. I'll pick up on something you said there about oil, because one theory is that data is like oil, and that you have to refine it and clean it and then distribute it. The other theory is it's more like renewable energy source, in that it's actually there's no end to how much of this stuff there is.
Right.
And I quite like the point about the value of data, being that data in itself is kind of valueless. And you add context to it and you get information, and then you add best practices, you get knowledge, and ultimately you add experience and you get wisdom. And it's when you can create wisdom from data that it becomes interesting. Which really means it's around who has access to this information from our perspective. How do you control who they have, what context they have access to that information, what they can then ultimately do with it, which could take you down a whole different moral, legal, and ethical view of data, which I don't suppose we've got time to go through today.
That's the next panel, right?
That's right.
Okay,
Just one
okay,
up.
fine.
But it's certainly interesting as to the people that are going to harness this this renewable source need to do it very, very quickly in order to differentiate themselves, in order to get that value, because there's a sort of half-life of value of information. And that's where using newer technologies, using cloud technologies, being able to innovate quickly, safe and in the understanding that the security of who gets access to it and what they can do with it is controlled by those vendors, is, if I was a CIO, an extremely important way for me to look at innovation.
And if you don't mind, I don't want to interrupt your sort of your cadence here, but to that point exactly. So the data is renewable. So knowledge economy, the good thing about it is your resources are constantly renewable. That's a really great thing. Physical world, not so great, create greenhouse gases. Okay, so we have 55 million customers in our loyalty system. To be able to get to them in real time, but to the right person, does change our business model on our present business model. So what I was saying before is this spins up new business opportunities which we've never really been able to achieve. So we move to an entirely new market when we're capable of doing this in a secure fashion. A good example is we have traditional casino gaming, that's Caesars Entertainment, and we're the largest gaming company in the world. And we just went public again about 2 weeks ago. So we're very excited, we're very happy. We're going up to the NASDAQ to ring the bell and do all that. So look for me on Bloomberg.
Cool.
But when you think about where does gaming go, where does it go in an entirely new, not just generation, but set of digital habits and lifestyles that all of us have adopted by the phones that all of you are holding up here in the audience, and by which we live in a very connected way. It moves from traditional gaming to things like esports. It moves to video gaming. It moves to all these digital-based activities which create an exhaustive data which is incredibly rich, but for which the activity and the transaction has to be real time in order for value to be actually accrued for the company and for our customer. And without security, without identity access management, you literally cannot get there. It's not possible.
And what you see on that front is as more and more content kind of gets generated, and our world is more unstructured content as opposed to sort of structured data per se. So we've been our customer base is basically doubling the amount of information being stored in Box on an annual basis. So we're now at about 35 billion files in the system, doubling every single year. And two major problems emerge when you think about that kind of scale. One is the more data I have, actually the harder it is to get value out of that information, because I want, at any given time, you only maybe are really extracting value from a small percentage of your content. And the more you have, the harder it is to find that small percent within the entire mass of information. Separately, the more data that we have, the harder it is to know what is the most sensitive information that I really have to secure, the top of the mountain, kind of issues that you're talking about. And so for us, that fundamentally changes what we need to be able to build and who we need to partner with to be able to both secure the data at scale, and how do you apply intelligence and new types of experiences to actually generate value from that information, both of which become enormously hard the more data you have, but are going to be the fundamental problems of the cloud age.
Yeah, I would say that's very true for like-to-like business models. It is not true when you create a new business model where actually, because of the enabling technologies, you can move to a new business model that's less competitive, higher margin, and is actually aligned better to the real-time data information that you can mine in a much richer level. And that means that when you look at, using the example of esports, you see real-time players all going through an esport event. And hopefully some of you have been to esport, or at least you have a teenager maybe, right?
Right.
So you go to an esport event and you see all the various players want to know how they're rated, not just on stage. So in the NFL, you can't get on the field. NBA, you can't get on the court, although I've tried, and you can, apparently I'm not tall enough, but you look at where esport is as an example of behavior, which is now more popular than the NFL, right? 2020, the amount of revenue in esport will exceed the NFL, and NFL team owners are buying esport leagues now, like it's going out of business. Well, I don't know, the NFL's going out of business, but
Don't go there.
I'm not, that's it. Let's stop there.
That's the third panel.
That's the third panel. That's a different thing altogether. But if you look at it, everybody wants to participate who is part of those events. Even my son, who loves to play Rocket League, wants to always see how he rates against everybody else. That's something that's real-time data that's amazing. But it doesn't work unless you can give identity and you can give security and you can put a real-time model for either subscription or transactions within that environment. That's what makes it work. And I think that's actually the real promise of what you end up doing.
And what's interesting is we just discussed is the volume of data, right? Doubling every year. Is there an Aaron's law there somewhere coming?
Let's not do that. After me. Yeah.
And the other one, you're talking about the timeliness of the data, right? So, right, that's becoming more critical that we can operate on close to real time on larger volumes of data.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And talking about the value, Rajiv, just to continue with you, let's talk about cloud from the point of view of ROI, from return on investment. Where are there examples where companies are actually, leveraging this model to make money, to contribute to top line?
Yeah, actually, when we talk of money, I think Les is a better person to answer that.
Right.
Because he was talking about the new business models
absolutely.
and the new approaches. And there are lots of examples, right? There are companies like AstraZeneca, right, who are using cloud, using data collaboration in the cloud as a way of doing better, faster, cheaper, more collaborative drug discovery, right? Which is not only money, but it's actually affecting our lives, right? There are lots of other organizations, and as we know, there are companies who wouldn't have even existed without the ability to have cloud and data. You give lots of examples, Uber and so on and so forth, right?
Right.
So I think this is a change, an inexorable change, one directional change in terms of where we're going. But as Les mentioned, there are also entirely new businesses, entirely new business models being created, sometimes from traditional companies, sometimes from brand new companies that are upending their traditional business models.
Charles, what are you seeing?
So as we move into this information economy, I hadn't realized that kids are going to just be playing rocketball and not actual football anymore. But as we move into this
Those are the numbers.
yeah, it's almost a sort of the singularity coming true as a world I don't really comprehend very well. But as we look at how organizations are making money, I think the models are changing, but the fundamentals are the same. That people have customers and they want to give them something which they're willing to pay for, and we want to be better than other people. As we see cloud adoption, there's two main areas. One, it's how do you make your traditional businesses work better? Mm-hmm. And particularly one area is mergers and acquisitions. The phenomenal statistic that 1 + 1 = 1.7 on every merger in the last 30 years just makes you wonder why people still do that. And a lot of that is because it's just hard to get those synergies. It's hard to get to onboard the workforces. It's hard to onboard the customers and the suppliers and get people working in a better way, which was why you bought the company in the first place. So we see a lot of more better ways of doing traditional business. Then we look at to the point about Uber and others. What are the new ways that even small companies can now compete with very large organizations that they couldn't before? Loyalty schemes is one area where we see it across the airline industry, across the leisure industry, and it's enabling organizations to get that sort of magical single view of a customer very easily through the applications and the points that you want to sell to them at. The second area then on that newer innovation is how do you bring on partners? And I guess we're all familiar with the Amazon model, which is really based on how can you get tens of millions of partners selling hundreds of millions of goods without actually having to buy anything. It's a very good model. But there's an awful lot of organization. Flex is a great organization that has completely changed its business model from just sort of doing semiconductors. Now they'll make a whole lot of things through a supply chain that they can onboard rapidly and securely and at low cost in order to take new products and innovate and take things to market quickly. So, but it's really back to this accelerating the speed at which organizations can test at lower cost and then achieve growth in new markets, which we see a big shift.
Well, Aaron, you talked about your impact of your sales in the Fortune 100 and 500. When it comes to companies leveraging the cloud to make money, I mean, you just give us a few examples, maybe.
Well, I think Charles kind of kicked off the whole point was we just see it as an acceleration of productivity. So the things that used to take a year to do take 4 months to do. The things that used to take a month to do take 3 hours to do. And so when you multiply that and compound it across the Fortune 500 and any company that is able to work in this new way in the cloud, you are just in the future faster. And that means that we can work in real time. We can have a global network of vendors and partners and contractors that we work as a global ecosystem. And all of these things just fundamentally change the way that we work and the way we operate. Flex is a great example of a company where instantly, if I'm in the Flex network, I get instantaneous manufacturing scale that I could not have had 5, 10, or 15 years ago.
No visits to the physical.
Yeah, and it's all done virtually, and my relationship with Flex is virtual, and I can get anything built and manufactured nearly instantaneously, and that's a dramatic compression in time to market for any kind of company building anything or delivering any kind of service. Again, all of this, bringing it back to security, means that we have to think about completely new ways of securing and protecting and managing our intellectual property and our information in this world. One thing that we pay a lot of attention to that is pretty pertinent here as well is compliance. All of a sudden, if you're a global business, because the internet allows you to be a global business overnight, I have to now think about regulations and compliance globally. And so that means I also need to think about information in a completely new way and privacy in a completely new way, and how do I manage my data in this model? And I can't do that in an on-premises environment, and I can't do it in a unconstrained or unrestrained environment where people are just working on any type of system, and I can't do it with shadow IT. So I need to be able to get my arms around how do I secure and manage all the information flowing in and out of the business in the 21st century.
Well, actually, great segue, Rajiv, because I did want to talk about this idea of cloud native, because security in the cloud is a very different animal than what we traditionally have known in on-premise world. So.
Yeah, I think the notion of cloud native is actually fundamental. Everything we've spoken about it is talking about cloud native, but let me just sort of try and put some words around it. So we can either take the stuff that we built on-premise and in a Frankensteinian way try and bring it to the cloud, and people have tried that and with some success. But I think when you're talking about data that's created in the cloud, interactions, collaboration that's enabled by the cloud, you have to build your models that are cloud native, that are built in the cloud, for the cloud, by the cloud, in the cloud itself, right? This is not something that you can just bolt on. And that involves anticipating the kinds of scale and volume of interaction in the cloud, that involves making sure you have the kind of security controls, identity-based and otherwise, that have to do with interactions in the cloud. So the security for these cloud-based interactions has to be cloud native. It has to be designed from the ground up to be anticipating the issues and the scale, the volumes, the speed, the requirements, interactions of the cloud. It cannot be something that we take from prior generations and try and bolt it onto the cloud.
Les, is that your experience that you in looking at tools?
Undoubtedly. I mean, if whether you're thinking about compliance, and for my company, we're in multiple jurisdictions. We have lots of compliance. And most of that compliance requires that we stay on premise with our systems unless we have a secure means by which to scale and identify who the users are of our systems internally and externally. So we have a big challenge to overcome, but that's how we're getting there through these technologies. But as you start to think about this shift, cloud first or cloud native is absolutely the right way to go, because most of our customers want a mobile app. And we've been very fortunate that in our second generation of what is called Total Rewards, we've had over 1 million downloads almost immediately from the new application. And that's because we're able to provide this capability. But if we think about these new mega apps that are coming on to mobile phones.
Mega apps.
Yeah, like like these, well, in China, it's WeChat, right? It's everything's in WeChat, right?
Right.
You could run your life inside WeChat. But if you think about that becoming part of not just an iOS or an Android OS, but literally an app that lets you go end to end for your experience. For us, it's all about our customer configuring their experience when they're on one of our premises, and then us continuing to be in touch with them when they leave. That capability, if we're not cloud native, we can't scale, because we'd be deploying 5, 6, 10, 12 apps, and it wouldn't work. So we have to give a singular point of interface to us in a very scalable, secure way.
Charles, cloud native, just
I'm just going to jump straight on that piece, which is, the customer's business is not writing apps, it's not writing security, it's running a business. In your case, you want to sell people an awful lot more gaming experiences. So the cloud native from a vendor perspective, this is holding vendors accountable for delivering things which isn't your business, and this is making it our business. And we've got thousands of customers, as have my colleagues here, and we have to make sure every single one of those customers is secure. This isn't a one-off for one company, which you would do yourself. And I think as I look at, yes, there's multi-tenancy, there's the ability to get up and running quickly, there's the elastic scale, there's all these cool things that cloud brings you. But for me, it's holding the organization accountable that's the professional that are doing this. And whether that's CASB, whether it's collaboration, or whether it's identity management, work with the best of breed vendors that are doing that for thousands of companies.
Great point. We're hitting the home stretch here, and one question I want to ask, we look ahead in the next 5 years. I mean, the threats are constantly evolving, and I imagine the solutions are too. Les, are there things that you'd like to see happen or you expect to happen in the next 5 years when we talk about security?
Well, I mean, there are a number of challenges for the next 5 years. Most of them are unfortunately unknown. We're asymmetric to some of these things. And so it's having sort of a distributed posture is probably at a high level the most effective way to look at this. You don't want to, when I think about the next 5 years, have one data center location by example for the bad guys to try to get at.
Right.
And having pushed back a major breach in my career, so one of the things that I've had to live through.
Was that an on-premise or?
Yeah, so we were dealing with on-premise, but we had already distributed our architecture. I know that the folks who don't want to do good will come up with all sorts of approaches. Having a cloud-based, secure, distributed design, if you will, to how you're managing and flowing your data is critical. Makes it much harder by exponential numbers. Now, I'm not going to get into qubits and quantum computing or anything like that. We're not going to stretch out there. But let's all agree or understand that we will have to think about those things as we go along. So what I do now, setting the stage for being secure in the future, is important, and cloud identity access management, core part of that.
Aaron, how do you see that? Are things keep you up at night, or do you think we're in good shape looking forward?
You don't have 2 hours for.
Well, I'm talking about quantum computing. Now I'm going to be kept up. But what I'd say, two big things that we're excited about. One is, as Charles kind of pointed to it, which is cloud native security changes the relationship between customer and vendor. And it used to be the case where if you were building software and if you were building applications for an enterprise, you sort of let the security vendors handle all the security for your applications. And so if we were doing content management or collaboration 10 or 15 years ago, we would say, okay, Symantec should handle all of the security for our application. But today, because people are using all of these applications in a much more end user driven way, because we're loading them from lots of different devices, because we're much closer to the data, we also have to be much closer to the security, which means that our customers have a higher expectation for the security that we deliver, and they have a higher set of expectations around the interoperability and the level of seamless integration we're going to have with security partners like the Oktas and the Skyhighs of the world. So that's only going to increase. Yeah. So you should expect over time that the industry creates more and more of these seamless experiences, interoperability between our platforms over time. That's the first thing. The second thing is, again, it's sort of a given with the scale of data that we're seeing, but if data is doubling every single year, we cannot expect that users are going to be able to keep track of the stuff that is most sensitive and most important to the organization, which means that we're going to need intelligence to be able to brought to this problem. We're going to have to be able to rely on more and more both machine learning and intelligent experiences to help us make sense of all of the information that our enterprises are working with and allow us to be a couple steps ahead in terms of protecting the enterprise. So we think over the next 5 years, we're going to have to continue to rethink. If we think about it, security moving from the on-premises world to the cloud, the next phase is cloud to then machine learning-based security architectures, and that's something that we're obviously, I think, all collectively pretty excited about.
I think your point about machine learning, of course, is well taken. The idea that there's a security guy who's going to protect your assets.
There's just too much information.
It's just too much.
Too many threats.
When you talk of 5 years out, it's difficult for anybody to talk of 5 years out, especially in the technology industry. So I fall back to what are fundamental principles that are going to hold us and looking back in history, right? So open architectures, right? So make sure that you have interfaces, you have a platform-based approach to allow other people to both connect with what you have and build on what you have. The second one is what you've seen is metadata sometimes is more important than the data, right? So make sure you create that information such that you can apply the intelligence to that information, right? So there are some of these. The third one is make sure it's democratized, right? So as opposed to being sort of one particular place where everything's held up, try and anticipate the case where that information needs to go to where it needs to go, but you have the controls flow with it, right? So what I'm saying is if you think about these fundamental principles, in my experience, that's more likely to help you be successful than trying to figure out exactly what's going to happen 2, 3, 4 years out.
Yeah, makes sense.
I quite like the 2, 3, 4 because that means I can say anything and it's not a lie.
Right.
It's the only thing where I know I can't. A couple of things. One, from a technology perspective, the rise of the developer is going to drive an API economy unlike we've ever seen before, which is a very different model for security. There were 1,600 breaches in the US last year, 1.5 billion records, and if Aaron's point is true about the doubling of data, in fact, it's probably faster than that, then this is just going to get bigger. And 8 out of 10 of those breaches were to do with stolen credentials, which is obviously an area that Okta's very keen on plugging that hole. But if you look at what that means, a credential is something like a password. It's not entirely secret, really, because it's typically a birthday or something.
Less and less so.
Yeah. So it's a lot more around behavioral. How is somebody's gait? What time do they normally log on? How hard do they hit keyboards? What do they click them? It's those sorts of behavioral things which are going to identify someone ahead of some bits of information which can be easily stolen. And I think we'll see an awful lot more in that side over the next 5 years.
Can we kill the password in the next 5 years, please?
Well, for super users, it has to go.
Okay. I think we got to get rid of it.
All right, we have a goal.
Do
That's
it.
a good, and I think an optimistic note to end on. I want a terrific panel. I want to thank you, all of you guys. That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.